UKG has acquired Shiftboard. Shiftboard, if you're in the industry, you would know them very well. They are pretty much primarily, if not only, in the energy and manufacturing space doing scheduling. And UKG acquiring them really shows, I think, a movement towards, and I hate to bring it back up again, but towards doing this sort of dynamic workforce planning and management, right? So taking this sort of existing platform and the technology around it, because these are mission critical spaces, right? When we're talking about the energy sector, when we're talking about, oil and gas manufacturing, this is, I think, an indication of a move towards, it's not mentioned here in the story, this is just me analysting, if that's a verb, towards skills-based scheduling.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome, everyone, to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. And we're recording today on June 5th, 2025. How do we get to June? I've been saying this. It seems like the timeline has just sped up, and we're going to have some conversations about why it's speeding up as we start off the conversation today. But first, I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group. We are a research and advisory firm focused on HR and the finance market. And joining me today is my co-host, Cliff Stevenson. He's our Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, welcome to the first show of the summer. Is it June starts summer, right, for most people?
Well, for those of us, I was going to say, for those of us in Florida, we started about 4 months ago. I know some of the listeners and audience are from there.
Good point. Yeah, so maybe it's just graduation season. I don't know, but we got so much to talk about today, and we actually had a conversation in the green room about why we have so much to talk about today, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things where we were like, is this too much? We know the shows have been getting longer. And we know it's not because we're looking for things. If anything, we've probably mentioned on the show that we're pulling stuff back. We're often holding stuff out, and we have to make those decisions. But we're also very cognizant of the fact that you can get very overwhelmed with all the stories coming on. And we see that as part of our mandate and our mission is to help you not feel overwhelmed, hopefully bring some fun to it, but let you know what we believe is most important and what we think should matter to you and that you should know without making it feel like, oh, this is just too much. It can be a lot.
It can definitely be a lot. And I think part of what we're realizing too is that at least how we're both feeling, and I think it would be interesting to see how others in our industry is that there are moments in time in particularly the HR and HR technology space where things are just speeding up. A lot of things are happening at once. The last time I kind of felt this level of heightened amount of activity in the space was probably around 2010, 2011, when we were seeing a lot of what was that back then, sort of the talent management systems and the HR systems sort of being consolidated, acquisitions, and there was just a lot of activity, a lot of investment sort of coming out of what was the recession back in the day. And then we kind of got into COVID in 2020, and there was some activity right after that, but not the big thing that we're feeling right now is this massive amount of people changes, a massive amount of sort of product changes, and a massive amount of how we think about work in general. And it's not all just AI. It's just that there was some pent up, I think, efforts coming out of 2020. And so I feel like we're at a point where this is one of those timeframes where it's just really sped up, right?
Yeah, I think what tends to be in these moments of high activity is that there are times when sort of it's smooth sailing in terms of the industry and we can be proactive. And then we see a lot of some activity, a good amount, right? We'll see some strategic partnerships, we'll see some M&A, we'll see some people advancing technology. And then there's times during areas of high volatility, right? As you mentioned, COVID, as you mentioned, the recession of 08, 010, where it's very reactive. But at those particular moments, it's kind of both. I think, it's like we're looking ahead. We got all this AI technology like right now and a shift in how we do work, but it's also reactive to the fact that certain just big economic effects are happening and people are reacting to that, whether it be anything from trade and tariffs to, as you mentioned, just global conflicts to generational shifts. As you said, it's not all AI. The workforce is changing and we're being proactive in that while also dealing with things that are happening right now. And that sort of perfect storm lends to what we're seeing now, which is Symptom, which is hour and a half long spilling the tea episodes.
Yeah. Well, so I think that's exactly, you hit on that sort of balance, right, that we're seeing in the market. And the main reason we wanted to have the conversation here up front was to let the audience, that they're not alone. Like what you're feeling and the anxiety you're having right now is not just about AI or about jobs. It's this sort of conglomerate of things that are happening in the market. I think it's, even for us as analysts, it feels a little bit sometimes like it's so hard to stay up on top of everything, to stay informed of everything. At the events that I was at this week, it was very much a conversation we were having. And we just think sometimes it's good to acknowledge where we're all at, right? Like that's a part of our being part of a community and making sure we're all doing okay. We're not all feeling like we're being left behind on all these conversations.
Yeah, the analogy I've heard quite a bit, and I think you have too, is that we always are instructed to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first, right? And I think, having that ability to realize where you're at, because as an HR professional, you are responsible for the people in your organization, but you have to understand everything that's going on with you first and, acknowledge the great work, but also know that, there's a lot happening. Make sure you feel grounded and ready to take on all of these challenges, and then help everyone else do the same. So yeah, we're very hyper aware of everything going on with that. I think it speaks to our background as practitioners, being able to sort of take in not just the data, but understand how that data is used. So we just want to sort of acknowledge you and thank you, listeners, viewers, for working with us, because we're always keeping you top of mind when we're constructing these shows.
Yeah. And with that being in mind, maybe one of the things that'll shorten things up a little bit is that our events list is starting to go down a little bit, Cliff. So it's no longer like a whole page long of events, but we do have some things that we're doing. Before we get into events, I just want to remind everybody, by the time you're listening to this, we'll be just about 2 to 3 weeks away from closing, that the big annual HR System Survey 28th year is out in the market. You are running out of time to respond. If you don't respond and get your responses in, you don't get access to that paper for free. That's $1,800, right? I know there's always someone who comes afterwards like, please, can I get in? We are closing the survey on, and I heard your guys' comments, Cliff. I saw this is the problem transcribing meetings. They were all talking about me in a meeting about how I kept saying June 24th, and the actual close date is June 25th. Correct? Did I get it right this time?
Oh, we'll let Tammy decide on that. But yeah.
All right. So you have till June 25th to get your response in. That was a meeting that I had missed with my team, and they basically I got on my transcript, and I'm reading through it, and they're all laughing at me because I keep saying June 25th. So, but I think the most important thing for everybody who's out there is we are already seeing a lot of responses. That doesn't mean we don't want you to respond. What that means is when you get the data back, it is going to be a solid set of data this year, because I think the whole market is wanting to see a little bit around the corner. And that's a lot of what this data does, because it covers such a wide swath. Outside of that also is the events that we're going to be going to. So Cliff, I know you actually, we just added one to the list. You're going to be going to Orlando next week to the Prism HR event. Is that correct?
Yep, one of the fun times, because I get to ride the train, which I got to do for UKG's analyst event. Very rare if you live in the United States South to get to take the train anywhere. But yeah, I'll be heading over to Orlando for Prism HR. That's under the Venture Solutions. I'll be meeting with Venture's CEO and hopefully a chief product officer and CMO as well, and let you know about what's going on, not just with Prism HR, but the others that fall within that sort of Venture umbrella. And it's pretty neat. As far as I know, this is new for them to start having events like this. And it's nice. It's in our sort of neck of the woods. And they're definitely one that's been showing up in our report, speaking of that report, more and more. So I'll be excited to see what's going on with everything they've got happening.
Definitely. Yeah. And then I'll be recording and we'll be delivering next week a LinkedIn Live presentation with our iSolve friends, because we just did a big event with them earlier this week. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we are launching a really, I feel it's a powerful paper, because for me, it's very a practical paper, and I love practical papers on elevating and leveling up the HR function. And so that will be, you'll be able to access that and participate with us live on June 11th. And then also we will be doing a UKG webinar, how AI is transforming time, talent, and trust, which is an interesting name because there is a lot of trust conversation. Cliff, you'll be doing that, right, on July 17th?
That's right. I believe there might be a special appearance from Stacey, though. So if you only want to see Stacey, I believe you should still sign in. We'll make sure that she's there. But yeah, I mean, this is the conversation, right? We kind of make jokes about, oh, it's time to talk about AI, or we haven't talked about AI yet. But let's not kid ourselves. It is changing the way that we are looking at a lot of the functions. Specifically, it is a little more on time and workforce management, which has really sort of floated to the top of a lot of conversations. I don't want to give us too much credit because it's probably a little gauche to talk about how great we are. But I do want to point out we have been talking about that this was going to be a big thing in 2025 as early as I think December or November of last year. We mentioned, going to Anaplan's event. I think we'll have some Anaplan news later. But this idea of time management, workforce management becoming critical in the remainder of 2025 and 2026, and how AI can help with that in ways that are very low risk, high reward is what we're going to be focusing on.
I've always said it comes back down to where is the work being tracked, right? So yeah, I'm excited about this one. You'll also be heading to Las Vegas then on June 16th through the 18th. You'll be at the iSolve Partner Connect event, correct?
That's right. And their sales kickoff as well. So at the sales kickoff, I'll be delivering a presentation to that group, connecting our data. Helping out with the iSolve branding there, connecting our data to the efforts they're going in to help, educate potential customers. And then I'll be on a panel talking at the Partner Connect showplace as well. Anything that comes out of that, of course, we'll report back to you, the listeners and viewers.
And then at the same time, I'll be heading to Dayforce in Dallas to do their leadership executive session. So it's a smaller group, but we'll be talking about what is changing in the world of the CHRO and the CIO and how those two worlds are colliding right now, and what we're going to be doing as an industry to sort of get to the next stage of what was workforce readiness. So I'm excited about that as well. So probably very similar along lines of kind of where the market is heading conversation that we've been having with a lot of organizations. And that will be in Dallas. So I am getting ready for the heat, which I know will be coming. And then kind of our last big stop, we have a couple of other events that we'll be doing in September as well. Those dates are coming and we'll get those on the board. But we do want everyone to know, because I know people are planning very early, will be the HR Executive Magazine event at HR Tech Conference in Las Vegas, September 15th through the 18th. We will have several sessions on the Women in HR Tech panel. I'll be doing one with a organization who's going to be talking about how they're approaching the world of sort of equity. And then Terry will be doing, our CEO will be doing a closing panel for the Women in HR Tech session on women in tech and HR and AI. So that's going to be a really exciting one. We definitely want to attend that. And then our big session, which I know everybody always asks us about, will be Thursday at 8 a.m. So don't party too much on Wednesday evening. It's going to be Thursday at 8 a.m. If you want to get the early scoop on what's happening in the HR tech market, you want to understand what the vendors are getting from a user experience perspective and a vendor satisfaction perspective. You want to understand how skills management and AI are actually being embedded and what vendors are being used most and what solutions are being used most in those markets. You'll definitely want to make time to attend that.
And quick reminder too, not because I'm not a morning person, so I'm not always advocating for getting up early, but this event for the last 3 years has been standing room only, or people haven't even been able to get in. So as loath as I am to say get there early, when it's that early already in the morning, you want to be there early to be able to get into this is a packed room. So just a heads up.
Yeah, no, completely. It's always, it really makes our heart feel good when we see that people want to get. And it is the only place you get some data, because there are things that we can only kind of provide in context, with sort of me and Cliff able to sort of give the insights in person that we don't do in our webinars, that we don't do in the report. So there is stuff that you get there that you don't get elsewhere. So, and Cliff, you will be at Oracle, I'll be at ADP, there'll be a couple other events, but we're going to be adding those later on. But we just came back from several events. Do you want to talk a little bit, Cliff, about what we saw at Cornerstone Spark? Because both of us were there. Was there anything there that you think is especially important to call out beyond our report outs?
Yeah, I the big story from them, and I would say that, we took from that, is their continued move that they started a year ago towards Cornerstone Galaxy, right? This is this foundationally AI platform that we've seen from a few other companies, such as ADP. And it's moving, this idea of connecting everything, right? This is the power of AI when it is used correctly, is taking all of the other information, and it goes beyond just learning, right? I think that Cornerstone, if you've been following them at all, they've long since been just a learning platform, and they have basically the entire talent suite, which allows you to finally get to that step of how is my learning affecting my business results, or how are, even performance management, how is everything intertwined, which kind of folds into the sort of galaxy imagery that they like to use. And not surprisingly, AI was a big conversation. Stacey, I found a lot of the talk, especially when you were on a panel, you got up there with Himanshu, the CEO at Cornerstone. Josh Burson was up there, and you asked a lot about AI and the power of these, but also the limitations. So I did like that there was a lot of discussion of where do we find the best use cases? How do we sort of mitigate? Karthik was very honest about this. Chief Product Officer, right, is Karthik's role. He was very upfront about there will be hallucinations, right? There will be errors. We're not going to say we're going to eliminate them. But we're instead going to say, how do we mitigate them? How do we learn from them? How do we kind of point them out and figure out where this comes from so that we can help you with that? And I really like that approach to, if we're going to be using AI, we have to accept not just its strengths, but its limitations as well. Those are sort of the insider things that I thought were very strong. I like the sort of tempered enthusiasm that I heard, like I said, especially when you guys on the panel did a good job of saying, I think this is really great, but I think that this is something we have to look out for. I think there'll probably be some stories as we continue on about the public perception and the growing change of how we view AI in the workplace.
I think the AI conversation, which overarches almost all the events that we've been at, but what I really liked about where Cornerstone was going with this is, one, is they're embedding it in their solution, which is probably one of the largest data sets in the market, right? I think that's the biggest thing to understand about that. And one of the largest data sets in the market, with the amount of tagged and contextualized information with it, right, on the learning side, which is what we don't see in a lot of the other solutions, where they have maybe like payroll has a ton of data, but it's very limited data, like just when you were paid and just your name, or just when you were paid and just your title. Cornerstone has this wealth of knowledge that comes from your learning styles, your learning approaches, your roles, your demographic, right? Like, you have to have all that when you're thinking about learning. And that's why I think they just have a really large data set that's going to make sort of AI more powerful. But they're also very clearly putting on almost all of those conversations, any place where AI is going to be showing up, notes about, be aware this to check for accuracy, which I don't see in a lot of the vendors doing that. And I really, really appreciate that. They're also building on traditional AI. I think it was really good. Himanshu mentioned very clearly, like, there are places where we do not need to reinvent the wheel, because we have had AI in this in quite some time, especially in their skills category, as well as the VR tailspin work, because a lot of that was built with traditional AI that is much more structured and, to be honest, much more sound in how it's bringing data back to you. So I liked a lot of that sort of open, honest conversation about sort of where they were at in the process, how they were creating sort of frameworks underneath everything so that it worked at a fundamental level, which meant it's going to take some time for them to build sort of the layers on top. What I really like, though, probably more because I'm a geek on this, is that they realize very quickly they cannot get to the level of conversation with their customers around how AI can and add value to the business without moving most of their customers onto their Galaxy platform. And so one of the big conversations the entire week was about how they're bundling, reimagining the packaging and bundling into three big sort of bundles, which is Learn, which is all of their LMS, LXP, content creation, those kind of tools. Elevate, which is all of their sort of talent related, performance related tools, internal mobility, and Transform, which is this skills based sort of future workforce planning, future thinking about where skills is heading conversations. And what was really nice about what they're talking about is that we all know we've been in this game where we've acquired a lot of customers. They are working on very cost effective packages, and they're putting some timelines on that for helping existing customers move off of just the traditional standard learning solutions that they've got into these packaged environments, because this is where the real magic happens. And we haven't seen that as much in certain organizations. Like Oracle did not make a big case to get people off of PeopleSoft. There's still over 1,200 to 1,500 organizations in on-premise environments and PeopleSoft because of that, right? I think one thing that we have learned, UKG did this very well with their on-premise environment too, is at a certain point, if you don't kind of figure out a way to get your customers to that next level in both an economical way or in just a sort of a shutdown way, you're not going to be able to get all the value out of it. And so I think that was, to me, the most important thing that they mentioned. And they're not cutting up. They're not saying, no, we won't support the older platforms. They're just making it more viable and more feasible for them to move there. We did have some good conversations with many of their existing customers, including a couple of our good friends like at ABA. And I do think that Cornerstone has to continue to watch that they're staying on top of things like SCORM compliance, because organizations have millions of dollars of investments in that sort of approach to managing learning before we had AI that could go in and read things very effectively. So and there's a lot of money wrapped around that. So they've got to ensure that they continue that certification. They talked a lot about continuing to increase FedRAMP certifications and moving that as quickly as possible because of how much their existing customers have involvement in federal government agencies, particularly Department of Defense. And then we did hear the announcement that they do plan to fully move into strategic workforce planning by the first half of 2026. And I think that's a clear call out to their HR organizations that they are sort of working with, that they are going to become more and more integral to the HR conversation. So lots of good stuff going on for them, I think.
Yeah, I promised you listeners we're going to be talking about strategic workforce planning. It's going to come up. It's one of those things that we're seeing more and more, and now it's like the chickens have come home to roost. We're seeing a lot of that, and we'll continue as we go.
Yeah, and then last week, listen to me. Yesterday, I was in Chicago, and I attended the iSolve Connect Chicago event and did the keynote speech there on leveling up HR. If you want to hear more about that, I would recommend joining the live web LinkedIn session that we're going to be doing later today on that, because we're going to talk all about not just that launch of that research, but I think what iSolve's really doing is they are really leaning into helping their customers take that next step in their role as HR leaders. And that's a really powerful thing that I think is a lot of tech organizations think about the tech first, and then they think about the roles that are using that tech separately. I think that iSolve's really honed in on our customers, and their approach to HR is as important as the technology that they're using, right? And so that was a really powerful thing to see. They did do a lot of opportunities to sort of walk through their product at this event. Joey Price was there, who I really love, who gave a whole session on AI and the transformation of AI. They had a great person there talking about regulations and how regulatory work and compliance is changing. So you get really in depth when you get a lot of these sessions. And then I shifted pretty quickly to the Unleash webinar, which again is another thing I would recommend you go out and register and see. We did a webinar with Unleash in partnership with Workday. Melanie Leger was there, and HPE, head of Workforce Technology and Strategy, Sadie Bell. That really was probably one of the best sort of webinars I've sort of participated in recently on AI in action, how HR leaders are empowering people and teams, because you've got kind of what we're seeing in the data, how Workday's kind of thinking about it and strategizing about it. And then you've got Sadie there giving you on the ground practical things that she's doing both within the Workday environment and even a little bit outside of the Workday environment. And we had lots of questions about how do I get started? Where do I start this process? So there was a lot of real good advice there. So I would recommend going out and seeing that. But it's been a busy week, Cliff. So, and we haven't even gotten to our stories yet. So
No, that's right. But by the time you're listening to this, all of those will be available online. So again, AI in action. Stacey Harris, if you want to do that search to find the one she was just talking about. The other one will be on LinkedIn, and that's Leveling Up HR or Stacey Harris. Some combination of those searches should let you find those, and they'll all be there. So, but yeah, let's talk about some of the news. Lots of M&A activity in the past 2 weeks. Some of this is just really in the past few days from the time of recording, I should say. So a big one, which is interesting because it just came out of NDA, is that UKG has acquired Shiftboard. Shiftboard, if you're in the industry, you would know them very well. They are pretty much primarily, if not only, in the energy and manufacturing space doing scheduling. And UKG acquiring them really shows, I think, a movement towards, and I hate to bring it back up again, but towards doing this sort of dynamic workforce planning and management, right? So taking this sort of existing platform and the technology around it, because these are mission critical spaces, right? When we're talking about the energy sector, when we're talking about, oil and gas manufacturing, this is, I think, an indication of a move towards, it's not mentioned here in the story, this is just me analysting, if that's a verb, towards skills-based scheduling, right? Because these are jobs that are highly dependent on specific skills, credentials, the type of things that wouldn't be specific to other types of scheduling platforms, right? It's different than it would be in other industries, right? If you've got someone with that certification, with that skill, they need to be on. It doesn't just filling a seat. It's not nothing against retail, but it's not like retail. If it's you can't just have someone there to do customer service. You need a very specific skill set. That's my read on that.
I'm completely with you. What's really interesting on this one, I think, is it's a shot across the bow, to be honest, with ADP acquiring Workforce Software, because Workforce Software was very well known in this industry as well. Energy, high compliance, certification required scheduling. I think this is UKG's response to that acquisition. And I do think you're right. It's going to get right into the skills conversations, right into the highly certification level job scheduling. Oftentimes why these are standalone solutions, because they are so specialized. So I think it's a good move for UKG. I think one of the things UKG is working on right now is re-architecting their infrastructure to create an environment that has more ability to go across these various solutions that they've bought and acquired and moved together. So I see this as just adding to that picture that they're creating. But I think you're really spot on where this is going to head. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. We'll see. We'll, of course, keep you updated. So other acquisitions, Acrisure, who is more in the banking, insurance, investing side, has acquired Heartland Payroll, right? So that's kind of interesting. Heartland is one of those ones that pretty much serves only small business, I believe. That's all I've ever seen. In fact, I don't know if this is like a full disclosure moment or anything, but they were the payroll provider for business that I owned as of 2 Saturdays ago, or used to own up until 2 Saturdays ago, an arcade bar in Tampa. So pretty interesting. They do show up in our report as well, often write-ins, and almost always from small business. We're talking under 50 people, but they are actually one of the leading providers because most companies are small businesses. And it looks like they will rebrand it, though. So the Heartland brand will be going away, but the services will stay for any existing customers, and seeing it sort of brought into a broader suite of services, right? With the sort of being able to do the insurance investment will help, I think, it expand for existing customers. We've often talked about the needs of SMB getting more and more complex all the time. And so I think this speaks to that.
Yeah, with 50,000 clients, I think, there will be some transition, but they're all very small, like you said, the SMB market. So I think that's, no matter how you look at it, the SMB market is going through a transformation right now, because SMBs need more oftentimes than what just one solution can provide in this market. Yeah.
Yeah. And this one was pretty interesting. HubSpot acquired Frame AI. So HubSpot's a CRM. In this case, we mean customer relationship management. Sometimes that can mean candidate in the HR tech world. But we're now seeing this sort of almost a integration of AIs, which is kind of interesting, right? Because we have Frame AI, right? And then we have, so that's sort of the conversation intelligence, right? Bringing in everything that comes with your customer interactions, right? And then you have Breeze AI, which I think is probably HubSpot's best known for, that we see a lot at sort of HR tech conferences. So sort of taking in all the data that you're getting from chats and customer interactions and any of that and integrating it into your CRM is kind of fascinating. I think this is one of the earliest indications I've seen where basically it's just two AIs kind of coming together to provide service. Usually it's sort of, we have a existing business and we're enhancing it with AI. This is sort of two AIs. I just found that one kind of interesting.
Yeah. And like you said, Breeze is found a lot more in the HR space, but we are seeing a lot of organizations really think through that funnel of customer to candidate, right? Customer to employee, customer to influencer. And that's where we're seeing this really start to connect up. And so I do think you have to watch a little outside of our industry sometimes to see what's happening here. That voice activated AI conversation is just really powerful in this market right now, right?
Absolutely. And it also helps connect, I think, ultimately something that we track when we talk about outcomes of using systems. A lot of it is in customer satisfaction or customer retention. Well, how do you know that your interventions are having an effect? This is going to help bridge that gap.
Yeah, I agree.
So.
Yeah.
Then speaking of another sort of service HR tech platform for small businesses, very acquisitive this last couple of weeks, Intuit. I think most of us know Intuit one way or the other. They're acquiring the HR platform GoCo. It's GoCo, which does a lot of HR and benefit solutions for small and mid-sized. So basically, I see this as Intuit expanding their product offering with this acquisition. I think sometimes when we see acquisitions, it's about tech or it's about people. Here, I think it's expanding its market reach because Intuit has done, I think, started sort of in tax, I think is how most of us in the US know them, but does a lot of the sort of HR record keeping for extremely small businesses. The people that I know that use them tend to be 1 or 3 person companies, a lot of small sort of doctor shops and lawyers and things of that nature.
Yeah, they show up in our research as payroll, right? And so this addition, I'm wondering if this will put them more a little bit, like we have to get more detail on GoCo, but will this move them from that 1 to 5 person market into more of a gusto range, right? Which was definitely a little bit more up to like 10 to 20 employees, right? Again, just that idea of moving up market, I think, is an opportunity for a lot of these organizations, right?
Yeah, no, and if they do get into that gusto range, they'll probably need to start thinking about customer service. And one of the things you don't really have to think about when you're in that small section, Stacey's laughing because she knows there's a story coming up about this. But I do think it's a good, we won't segue right to that, but it's something to keep in mind because it is something that has to happen when you're just completely relying on your tech. It's self-service to larger companies that are going to need some customer service, and that transition can be painful. That's a little teaser for later in the episode. But let's talk a little bit about some of the companies that we've seen that are expanding their offerings. Not so much M&A, but adding things on, receiving new funding, et cetera, et cetera. So one, and this was a little bit ago, but Anaplan has really stepped up. They've been on the show quite a bit on terms of they certainly never struggled in the financial space, and I wouldn't say they've struggled anywhere, but they are really stepping up more into the HR space. When I say stepping up, that's what I mean, right? They're getting into roles that are more traditionally HR, and they're also really adding into their AI portfolio. There's the Anaplan Co-Planner, which again is giving that conversational access, right, to getting into the reporting and the analytics that are coming in through all of these different systems. There's also a detector and workflow agents, AI agents, that can do things like detect data anomalies, figure out what should I do next type of conversation. And then, Stacey, you just had a very in-depth conversation with Koros over at Anaplan, kind of getting into the roadmap and how they see the future and the interconnectedness of it all. It's something that we've talked a lot about. What is something that stuck out for me, and maybe you can help kind of explain it, use the big brain to help me figure it out. Is this, something he hit on, the difference between planning and management? not just financial planning, financial management, just workforce planning, workforce management. Can you help me smooth brain understand?
Yeah, no, and we're working on this topic right now, which is, so I think you'll see a little bit more about come out this fall on this conversation, because I think there's a big conversation about where does strategic workforce planning, where does headcount workforce planning, where does operational planning sort of sit? Are these financial investments? Are these HR conversations? What is the middle ground? And one of the things that, we had the conversation with Koros, and Koros has been around for a long time, used to work at SAP SuccessFactors, now works over at Anaplan and their strategic role there for product planning on the HR side. What basically their perspective is in the market is that there is a system of planning and there's a system of management. And so their perspective is that your HR platforms, your operational platforms are about managing your resources, managing the work, managing stuff. But none of them have the capacity to kind of bring everything in and be a full ongoing system of planning. And the biggest differentiator in a lot of that conversations is the ability to do the modeling and the scenario planning at multiple levels and ranges, and then pushing that once you decide on which of those models or scenarios you're going to move forward back into the systems that are going to be managing that. I think that what we're also going to be talking a little bit about is that I think we have for a long time in HR said strategic workforce planning is our domain because it asks the important questions about people and resources and things and if you ask us strategic workforce planning, I just went to a Teleros event. I crashed it just slightly last night with some of the top analytics and planning professionals in the globe around the world. Daniel Bushin was there from Sanofi. We had a couple of other people that I'd met from lots of big name companies. It was sponsored by One Model, and Richard Rosenow and his team were there too. And what I heard from them, very similar to this conversation, is that workforce planning and all the elements only work when we've got some of the other stuff in place. And that's much more tightly tied oftentimes to finance, which is operational planning and headcount planning. And so what we're looking at is that continuous feedback loop that we have to have in place to make these two worlds, finance and HR, work together. Because we've got data, and you'll see this in this big report that we're going to be launching out with iSolved. We actually analyzed how strategic each function in the business thinks that HR is. And I was not surprised to see that CEOs, executives, business leaders actually think that HR is much more strategic even than HR thinks. But when we asked IT and finance, that number dropped dramatically. If you're interested in seeing that, pull that report. I was very frustrated with seeing how much finance doesn't view HR as a strategic partner sometimes. And I think this is the crux of that conversation. So a lot of explanation there, but I think it's a really important topic right now, right?
No, absolutely. And also that whole going back to sort of some of the ways that they're looking at AI, Anaplan is, I think feeds into something else that we've seen discussed. And I thought there was a really good article. You saw it as well. You sent it to me. This was from Sangeet Chaudhary, who's written a few books, Platform Revolution, Platform Scale. It's basically about this idea of we are getting sort of complacent about AI and how do we best use it, right? So, using AI, of just saying, okay, if we learn to use AI, then our jobs will be safe. But really saying that the job itself has changed, and saying that really there's a lot more value in using AI in things like evaluation, right, rather than generation. It's not just, here's how I help you do my job, but here's how to do something better, which I think reminds me a lot of, what we just talked about with the Anaplan detector and things like that. Like, here's the information. What do I do next? Or, here are data anomalies, giving you the data rather than like, can you create something for us? So I just thought it was really nice talking about how we think about AI and how we frame AI as well, sort of fits into that. Yeah, so that is really great. And before we move on, I wanted to bring up something just to sort of a little more fun. But we talk a lot about the sort of swag. If you've ever gone to a conference, you'll know this term. If not, or if you're outside the country and a different term is used, what I'm referring to are the little tchotchkes, the little giveaways that different companies are going to have at their booth for you. It could be pens or notepads. I'd say that's the most common, but sometimes we see some creative ones, some fun ones. And we're even thinking about starting a new sort of just fun, just a side podcast, something to listen to from Summer Oriano from our podcast. You've often heard her name at the end. We're thinking along the lines of Summer's swag show, where she'll give a roundup of all of the different swag that she sees. And I found this is a pretty neat one. This is for those of us whose desks are a little unruly. It's a cable management thing. This was from Anaplan, actually, from their conference. So you can see there's a little label there. And
Nice.
so your cables go there. You can glue it onto your table or just leave it there, and the cables go so you don't have that big mess behind your laptop. So I just thought that was fun, and I was like, well, Anaplan always has fun ones. Stacey, I know you've probably got some really wonderful ones at all the conferences you've been to, so maybe we'll start throwing those in.
I like that idea. We were just talking about this. I have quite a few cute ones from iSolve because they have their people hero things, but I don't have them with me. So next time around, maybe we'll show them out. Yeah, we were just thinking this was kind of fun. Like, what are the things that we gravitate towards? Because I think there's always this conversation about, is swag valuable? I mean, I don't know. I feel like it is good to have the product name in front of you sometimes, but it's definitely more helpful if it's a thing that you're using every day. Like I have a couple cups from a few organizations that I can't see it in my thing, but that is very nice, right? I can't show them. I'll have to remember.
Well, I have a wrist rest from Sapient Insights Group for when you're typing.
All right, the whole audience is going to be like, you've been talking for 45 minutes. Now you're talking about swag.
I know. But yeah, I believe in this. And I'm curious also for anyone that's outside of the U.S., what term do you use for this? I've only heard swag, but I'll bet you anything it's something much different. I'm especially interested in Australia, as long as it's not a curse word. I know you Australians are, and we love you. But yeah, I always like it when it's associated with something positive, something for your children, something for your pets. And speaking of associations, things that you want to sort of name recognition partner with, Workday is working with Microsoft's Entra ID, their partnership. And although that was announced a couple weeks ago, we are also seeing this whole idea of this with Cornerstone, right? Also partnering with this. Can you talk a little more about that? Because that was something we just saw recently.
Yeah. One of the things at the event that was pretty highlighted was Cornerstone's tight partnership with both Salesforce as well as Workday. And the Entra ID, I think the interesting thing there is it's about that security and that level of authentication that's required at the technical level on your solutions and your things, and at the process and at the data level. That's really becoming a critical conversation. UKG is kind of doing somewhat of a similar agent kind of authentication with ServiceNow as well. So I think one of the things that you and I will maybe do over time is start to bring some of this all together to say what's the differences between these various partnerships, because you hear it all the time, right? Like this group is part of Microsoft, this group is partnering with Microsoft. So one of the things that we're going to be talking a little bit about probably this fall is what do partnerships actually look like, and what are the things that are different between the various partnerships. And I think that's going to be a valuable conversation to have right now, right?
Especially as we grow more and more in this idea of the cluster model of purchasing and using HR systems, understanding where those lines, when you're making those clusters, is that a partnership? Is that part of the partner ecosystem? What's the difference? And so, yeah, that's definitely a conversation let's keep having. And speaking of partnerships, PayScale, partnering with Pearl Meyer. So this will be for adding into the compensation that PayScale, compensation data that PayScale is able to provide to their customers. Pearl Meyer is one that I have seen written in and that I know just barely from my old recruiting days, because they do executive compensation, which is, if you've ever dealt with it, you understand it's sort of its own animal. There's different ways that executives are compensated, sometimes on company performance, sometimes it's stock options, et cetera, et cetera. It can get very complicated with vested stock options. But still, if you are trying to be competitive and hiring some great people, we're going to be talking about some movement in just a bit, keep in mind that it's important to have this information. It works differently than a lot of the other types of compensation. I thought that was neat.
Yeah, and it's probably worth noting, like 80% of our survey respondents who say they're using benchmarking, right? It's about 40% of the market who's using benchmarking say that they're using it for compensation conversations, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think on an earlier episode we talked about the both strengths and weaknesses of using benchmarking for different types of strategies. But I think with compensation, that's where it most naturally fits in, right? That's where you really want to see how others pay, because you're thinking about it competitively. You don't exist in a bubble in this case. You really have to think about how are my competitors doing this, so you can work with that information. We also see some expansion internationally. Darwin Box is moving further within the sort of APAC region with native payroll now in Indonesia. So again, not going through a sort of conversion partnership, but actually having payroll in country there in Indonesia. A high growth area that we've seen a lot of companies specifically from Indonesia. So we know that is an area well worth investing, and Darwin Box clearly feels the same way.
Yeah, it's good to see. I think, one, that they're very strong in APAC. We do know they're trying to move more effectively into the US market as well in this space. They basically put out numbers. They're processing 1.2 million pay slips monthly. That's a pretty good number for how long they've been in the market. And so I think, that global payroll conversation is continuing to be a really heated topic, and who's native versus who's partnerships. I think that's another area where it's good to know your data and know your vendors when you're working in this area, right?
Yeah, and although I didn't mean to, that really is a good point in differentiation when we talk about partnerships for payroll versus native payroll and what that means. But yeah, so this next story is about Awardco. They have just joined the quote unquote unicorn club, 165 million in Series B funding. Some of that funding even came from Ryan Smith, the founder of Qualtrics, another company that we track within our survey and have worked with. So what this signifies to me, there's been a lot of activity. I know we were just talking about WorkHuman, for instance, and their sort of expansion out of just being seen as a rewards and recognition. We know Awardco, fairly highly rated in our survey because they do more than just awards, more than just recognition. Same with OC Tanner. We're really thinking about how does everything tie in? How does this data work with talent management as a whole? How do we use this as a way to sort of prove the value of our efforts, whether that comes through our hiring, our training, or just recognition, but you see that through the type of information that can be gathered using, for instance, organizational network analysis in the rewards and recognition space. So I think that this is a sort of symptom, or I guess you could say I think that this is a result of this getting us more and more towards this AI or data-driven world, right? And what an untapped amount of data is out there through our recognition and basically internal employee communication, right? That can tell you where leaders come from, everything.
Exactly. Can we figure out through just how we do recognition or how we motivate employees what the opportunities are within our organization? That's really what that's driving at, if they can get there. I don't know if everybody realizes, because you did this about 3 years ago, Cliff. You said, hey, look, I think it's important for us to do a user experience and a vendor satisfaction rating on rewards and recognition solutions. And I said, I don't know if enough. Not only do we know enough people are using them, but we've been doing that now for 2 years. It is an important aspect of the total HR tech staff when we talk to a lot of organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing it more often tied into things like succession for the exact reasons that you indicate, that you're able to figure out who's talking to whom and who are sort of your informal leaders, or who has the information and who do people go to for that. And if you're able to bring that all together, where that's succession management, internal mobility, all of that, then you're doing things right. And I think one of the other things you'd want to put into there is compensation, which we've been talking about. So Compa, who is someone else that we've tracked and worked with in the past, they are bringing AI into their compensation platform. They have 2 different agent models, Analyst AI and Partner AI. Those are the 2 agents, which will be your market intelligence in the Analyst AI, and then the Partner AI, which allows you to sort of put together offers, right? Now, This is so interesting because you think about the pay scale partnership, or their work there of trying to get the sort of complicated nature of executive offers together. If you're able to have an AI handle some of that complicated nature of gathering that information, right? And AI is only as good as its data sources. But if you're able to get that, you can on the fly adjust your offer accordingly compared to what we know that the person would want, which allows you to be highly competitive in what we know is going to be a very tight labor market.
It is, and I think we are seeing, it's interesting because we're seeing, a different mix of organizations get into this conversation, right? We are seeing the skills technology get into this conversation, like Eightfold, as well as the Sky Hives, those guys who can tell you what skills are at your competition and then how much, then you can tie that to your compensation numbers, right? So I think this whole front end space about what do we pay and how do we make decisions about the workforce value proposition is definitely a big part of where AI is heading. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, this one was pretty interesting because it is something we have seen on our survey. And I know you've got some thoughts on this one. So this is Grammarly. All right. So how often have we talked about the blurring of the line between what is traditionally called HR tech and what is productivity tech? Well, that line is so blurry, I don't even know it's there anymore, right? It's a very wispy fog because Grammarly has now secured $1 billion with a B from General Catalyst to build out their platform, not just fixing your sentences, but a general productivity platform, right? So being able to see, what tasks and sort of the amount of work that you're able to do to be able to answer questions. This is all speculation, by the way, on my part. We don't know much. We know they're aiming for an IPO, a public offering, but we don't know exactly what that'll look like, except that we know, for instance, that just about 6 months ago, Grammarly brought in the CEO previously at Coda, Shishir Malhotra. So, that is a more broad-based sort of term. We're going to be using AI in ways that affect all your work across all of your platforms, right? It'll be Grammarly within Workday, perhaps. Who knows? I don't know. I'm speculating.
Well, and we should note that in our survey last year, Grammarly was number, I think, 3, just behind Copilot and sort of general ChatGPT, right? AI from OpenAI as the number 3rd sort of highest ranked solution that when we asked HR professionals, what were they using that had AI, right? It was Grammarly that they identified as their AI, one of their AI tools. And so I think this again goes back to kind of that understanding of what is AI and how is it embedded. And we've already seen Zoom pick up and try and become a general use platform, right? I think we're definitely going to start to see Grammarly start to go into that direction as well. So again, watch the space, right? It's going to change rapidly.
This next story is for, it's got a lot of different crossover appeal. We've definitely broken containment here from just the world of HR, because now we're talking about some video game manufacturers, Epic Games. I think we all know them, or if not, I believe that's the Fortnite people. And they are out of where?
They're out of Cary here, where I'm locally located. But the interesting thing with this story with Epic Games is they basically brokered a deal, a partnership with SAS. Now, anybody who knows SAS, they're also located here in the Cary area, two of the biggest employers in our space. And Epic Games is such a big name for the gamers in the market. And SAS is one of the biggest names in data analysis and data analytics. It has a lot of the biggest data analytics tools in the market. If you go to school for data analysis, data analytics, and any kind of data work, you're going to work on some sort of SaaS solution at some point, right? And so what's interesting here, which I really thought, was that the two companies are talking about using technology from the video game maker to create digital twins of data, because the video games, most people don't realize this, but some of the best modeling and scenario planning is built for gaming engines. They're talking about doing digital twins for people who are using SaaS products to get digital data sets. And this is the biggest conversation, is how do I create more data that's clean and accurate? And this might be a very, very powerful tool for a lot of those people doing AI conversations down the road, right?
Yeah, they actually use a great example of Georgia Pacific, another Southern employer, where they're trying to use driverless autonomous vehicles within their floor and figure out if they can model all these objects, what would be sort of ideal routes? Would it get in people's way? How would they best deliver products in the manufacturing floor? So we've talked before about what are some possible use cases for metaverse. And in certain cases, it's working with tools or situations like a nuclear reactor, where You're not going to have a whole lot of true hands-on time, but maybe if you can give someone some scenarios and let them actually see where things are and work around that physically, it will make them more comfortable when it comes time to do these things, in real life, saving a lot of time and money.
I think this is one that if you are in the data space at all, keep your eye on this, because you might be very surprised that your favorite gaming tool might be the thing that actually gives you the insights you need from a AI data twinning conversation, right?
Right, and you can justify on your expenses finally buying that sweet gaming rig. No, I need this to run Unreal 5. Yeah. So we mentioned, executive compensation and stuff like that. So I wanted to talk about some executives that are moving around and joining new companies. So first up is Yura Slattery joining iSolved as their chief customer officer. So that's really wonderful. iSolved is certainly one that always performs well. It's sort of a rising, up-and-coming company. I don't even know if you can call them that anymore. They're established at this point within the HR tech space. And one of their, I'd say, defining features is how much attention they put towards service and towards their customers. So they do not take these sort of hires lightly, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, these are big shoes that Yura is stepping into. I had the great pleasure of meeting Yura actually just yesterday at the iSolved regional conference in Chicago. I think she's just literally on the job for about a week at this point. It's not only was she just a treasure to get a chance to kind of reconnect with, but we've known her in her previous roles because she's definitely done a lot of work previously with Cornerstone. She was there for about a year, and then she was for many years at UKG in similar kind of support customer roles inside those organizations. So what I think this for me highlights where iSolve's probably heading, which is because when you start moving up market, the biggest issue is your customer care models, right? And so I think this definitely bringing in a chief customer officer who's got experience with a lot of these bigger companies, I think really elevates the conversation about where iSolved is heading, right?
Absolutely. And sort of there's a connection here to this next story that Michael Flannery is going to be the new CEO at Daxtra. And although he was most recently at Adversity, which does workplace mental health, he was also at one point the chief customer officer at iSolved.
Yeah, Michael, we've known for a couple of years. I'm really excited to see him go Daxtra. Daxtra is a very data-driven organization, right? And I think we're going to see that there is a lot of focus on Daxtra on data literacy, data, artificial intelligence management of data from both a recruiting perspective, but also from sort of like a parsing and insights perspective that you get kind of through that resume parsing candidate search, right? So I think there's going to be opportunities for us to probably bring some more insights from Daxtra down the road. We're hoping to get a chance to catch up with Michael and the team on where they're at with that. But I had the chance to meet a few of their newer employees at the last event that I was at Unleash. And so I think we're hearing more and more about them. They're definitely bringing in new talent along the way. And I think, between their strength in data and their strength in what they're doing with AI, Michael's definitely stepping into a role that an organization that's rethinking their next level conversation, right?
Yeah, that's wonderful. So as we're wrapping up, there was a few stories that we thought were pretty interesting that you may have seen that we thought we want to bring to you. So one is that the World Economic Forum, we've talked about their data before, they tend to do very good work, very sort of strict with their data governance. So I usually feel safe with their sort of stats. And they had one about gender parity in the intelligent age. And there was some really interesting stuff, and I thought it went nicely with something we've been talking about quite a bit, both on this show and sort of back in the lab, back at HQ at Sapient Insights Group, looking at some of the data around this. One thing that we talked about, I can't remember if it was the last show or the show before, but the sort of outsized impact that AI work is having on females over males. So this is something we'd heard anecdotally, and now we're seeing some data around it. So women are more likely to hold roles that are disrupted by AI, rather than, meaning they're more likely to see replacement rather than enhancement or augmentation. And there is more growth in number of women in tech. That has grown, but retention is a big problem, right? They're coming in, but they're not finding it's the right environment. And I think as a man, I should stop talking about this now, Stacey, and let me know what you think rather than mansplaining the impact of AI on women.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about this in the past. I know it's an going conversation. How do we make sure that both women and men are at the forefront of this AI conversation, and that we don't? And part of the reason that we see that a lot of women's roles are being disrupted by AI is because there are industries where women lead and are more likely to be hired initially. And a lot of that comes down, we know like 80% of HR is females initially, right? And then as we move into higher level technology roles or higher level public based roles, that shifts to more male leadership inside of organizations, right? And so some of it's perception, some of it's, again, the environment, where you're working, where do you feel comfortable? Do I have an environment that supports all the things? Some of it is the role of caretaking that ends up being sort of disproportionately positioned on different genders inside of regions and countries. But I do think that there is a conversation here too about who is training AI. It's one of the big things that we got out of the Cornerstone event was that they want to become the #1 training platform for AI. And we haven't talked a whole lot. We talk a lot about how AI is being used and what data they have and is it biased or not. We haven't talked a lot about the actual process of training AI. And this is one where I think there has to be a lot of conversations about who is training AI, because they're making some big decisions about what it pays attention to and where that bias is being laid out. So yeah, this is a critical one, I think, to keep watching. I was glad to see World Economic Forum had done some work here. Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot of really cool, fun stories, but and we can talk about some of those if we have time. If you, the listener, want to hear more, I'm gonna mention a few that we want to maybe talk about. Write in the comments on LinkedIn or on YouTube if any of these are interest of you, and we'll expand. We definitely, I think a lot of people saw the story about the books that were recommended by an AI engine. It was in Chicago, and I forget where else, Philadelphia. And, it kind of just shows about something we've talked about on and on about the limitations and strengths of AI, how people are perceiving it, and how that might affect how you use it at work, how you sort of describe it.
Let's just say this again. These were 2 big city papers that published AI generated reading lists that had fake books on them. Let's just make sure people realize what that story is about. If you're interested, we'll have some more conversation about it.
Yeah, we can put the links in. A story about cryptocurrency possibly could be part of your 401k holdings plan investments, and OpenAI's continued move towards being sort of ubiquitous within hardware, right? It's powering pretty much all systems. But the one that I think is near and dear, because it really does deal with a company that we know and track. And it was a story about customer service at Gusto. And it was someone talking online. And the fact is they just had a large platform. And I think it's interesting to me because we have said this in the show, and I feel like people probably think that we're being, I don't know, self-aggrandizing or writing our own commercials or something. We're like, oh, this is your chance to be voice of the customer. But this is really interesting because this is someone with a large platform, a lot of influence within the industry, and they were having troubles with using Gusto. If you don't know Gusto, they're a payroll provider that generally works with very small businesses.
And we should note that we use Gusto at Sapient Insights Group. I literally sent this message to my team after I had seen it on LinkedIn, and they were like, "Oh, this is not our experience." But so I think again, there's a conversation there about customer service, different levels. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And so sometimes you can say, okay, if this person's having trouble catching the ear for things they'd like to see change, what chance do I have at a smaller company without? Well, that we believe that we are able to amplify those voices because we know not every company, but those that do take that seriously. They look at every comment and they find these issues and then they fix them. Sometimes it's easier when it's anonymous because there's maybe no egg on the face sort of situation, meaning they're not embarrassed, by sort of doing this publicly. But yeah, I found it interesting because it was sort of a larger conversation about customer service. And as we were talking about with iSolved and a few other companies, putting your focus there can sometimes be the differentiator.
Yeah, and it's hard when you're scaling up, right? Like that's part of the conversation too. So we'll put those notes in the list for the listeners in our LinkedIn posting on this, Cliff, because I do think, again, whether you love Gusto or you don't, or whether you love, any other vendor, right? There's always going to be situations where things don't go the way you want them to. I think the real answer is just how are you addressing it, and do you have the right number of resources to do the customer care you need in the organization, right?
That's exactly it.
Well, Cliff, we have got a little over an hour today, so not terribly bad, but we do want to just let everybody know that we are trying to get these down to a manageable size, but we appreciate those who hang in and take the time to listen because we know there's a lot of topics that everybody's trying to listen on. But as we wrap today, a couple of big pushes. Just a reminder, the survey's open. You've got about 4 weeks left, maybe even by the time this is launched, probably more like 2 weeks. Go take the survey. It's the only way you're going to get that full paper without having to pay for it in October. Even if you don't know if you're going to be doing any kind of selection in the next 6 months, it's really, get it done early so that you have that resource if you need it. All right. Also, if you want to get news about where Cliff and I will be at, what other things are going on with our research, what other papers we're launching, because there's going to be a lot of papers coming out on benefits and what we're doing in the SMB space, as well as elevating the HR function. Please be sure to sign up for our newsletter for ongoing updates. And we'll be about where we'll be speaking. We'll be visiting all those things. Also, be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. All of these HR Huddle episodes you can find on our Work to Find platform. Please be sure to like and comment on that. It does help. The whole community is there, and we want to hear comments about what's working and what's not working. To stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content, you can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn and Instagram. And I have been trying to put more pictures out there so you guys get to see some of the fun stuff where we're at and all the places we're going to. Cliff, as always, thank you for coordinating, pulling all this together, getting to get the notes together when we get it posted in the next week. Thank you to our production team, including Gray Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast and run by their amazing founder, Kelly. Our marketing team, Summer Orlano, Cole Harris, as well as Mark Machado. And thanks to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. You are what make this important, and your time, your investment in letting us know that we're hitting the right topics that you guys find valuable. That's it for this episode of Spill the Tea on HR Tech. We hope that it has been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. And we'll be back in just 2 weeks with another pot. Listen to me, it's been a day. Another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights, everyone. Thanks.